Let's look at the types of powers that have been established with the Constitution. Let's start with enumerated powers. And enumerated powers are simply powers that are specifically given to the federal government. Article 1, Section 8, clauses 1 through 17 lists all the enumerated powers given to Congress. So Congress can declare war, Congress can tax, Congress can coin money. There's a bunch of those, and you need to read through the Constitution and look at those. But those are enumerated powers, specifically given to Congress. We know without a doubt that Congress has the power to tax us because the Constitution states right in there that they can do that. We know that Congress has the power to declare war, and only Congress can declare war. How do we know that? Because it's an enumerated power. It's written right into the Constitution. There's no questions at all if they can do that. Those are enumerated powers. The Constitution also, though, establishes implied powers. And implied powers are powers that are not specifically stated within the Constitution, but are hinted at. They get their they originate from the necessary and proper clause, which I'll show you here in a minute. Let's see. Yeah, the necessary and proper clause says that Congress can make all laws which are necessary and proper in carrying out into execution their foregoing powers. Now, their foregoing powers, those would be the enumerated powers. But the last power given to Congress is this one, Clause 18, which says they can make powers on anything else that are necessary, which would be needed, and proper, which would be the right thing to do. But they have to be able to link it or tie it to one of their enumerated powers. And let's use an example here. Let's use drafting. Okay, Congress has the power to raise an army and raise a navy. They have a power to declare war. Those are enumerated powers. But nowhere does the Constitution say that Congress can force people or draft people into the military. But they have that power because it's implied power. It is implied or hinted at that if Congress has the power to raise an army and raise a navy, they should be able to force people to serve in that army and navy. They get the power to draft because of the necessary and proper clause. And you can draw a line from drafting to one of their enumerated powers. Raise an army, raise a navy, actually many of their enumerated powers. Declare war. So you have to be able to do that. So Congress has these implied powers that really stretch out the powers that Congress has. Sometimes the necessary and proper clause is referred to as the elastic clause. If you think about it, if the government only had the enumerated powers, it'd be very limited. They could only do, what the Constitution says. But by the necessary and proper clause, it allows them to expand their powers, to make laws not on everything, because again, you have to be able to tie it to one of those enumerated powers, but to make laws on many things. And we'll get to how that's been expanded later. Reserve powers are then what the states have. And the 10th Amendment says powers not specifically given to the United States by the Constitution are then reserved for the states. Okay, so think of that's the whole federalism thing that we talked about, in the last video. So Congress has the power to do a number of things. Okay, those are those enumerated powers. But if Congress doesn't have the power to do so, then the states get to make laws on it. A good example is driver's license. The federal government the Constitution doesn't say that Congress has the power to make driver's license, so those are up to the states. The states can decide how old you have to be to drive in that particular state, and if we have restricted driver's license and so on. That's why you notice that some states, like South Dakota, you could get a form of a driver's license at 14. Other states, like Minnesota, you can't till you're 16. Why? Because that's a reserve power. It's up to the states. So all the states are going to write their laws on driver's license. They're probably going to be similar, but they're not going to be identical. Same thing with speed limits. If you notice, if you're driving in the interstate, South Dakota sets the interstate at 80 miles an hour, but Minnesota does not. And if you keep going east, you'll see that Wisconsin has a different speed limit on the interstate too. Why? because there's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government will set a speed limit. So then it is a reserved power, and that means the states can make whatever law they want on it. You will notice that most of the laws that are made by the states excuse me. Most of the criminal laws. Everybody who's committed a crime and is sitting in the South Dakota penitentiary committed a South Dakota law. Murder, rape, manslaughter, burglary, robbery, those are all South Dakota laws. Yes, every state has similar laws, but each state writes their own. And there is federal law too, and we'll get into that later. But we have talked about the powers before, but those are reserved powers. Sometimes the federal government wants the states to do some things. Well, before we get to that, I apologize. Let's look at one way in which the federal government has been able to make laws on lots of things, and that is the Commerce Clause. One of the enumerated powers given to Congress is known as the Commerce Clause, which means that they have the power to regulate commerce, which is trade, buying and selling. Well, because buying and selling is used all the time, they can make laws on anything that deals with buying and selling. And maybe a good example I can give you is civil rights laws. Remember segregation and segregated lunch counters? Well, that was up to the states. The states could make laws that say that the business could refuse to sell food to an African American. Well, the federal government didn't like that. As the civil rights movement was going, they wanted to make some changes, but do they have the power to do so? Well, if they can link it to one of their enumerated powers, well, the Commerce Clause is the easiest one to link it to. And if they can do that, then they can make a law. Well, in a restaurant, you buy and sell food. The food itself is bought by the restaurant. The napkins used there and, the different products are all bought and sold. So a restaurant, without a doubt, is commerce. And because the Constitution gives Congress the enumerated power to regulate commerce, they have the power then to regulate who you can serve in a restaurant. So a civil rights law that says that you can't segregate is an implied power that Congress made that can be linked to the Commerce Clause. And there's so many of these. Not everything is bought and sold, but lots of things are. I mean, think of healthcare. Why can Congress make a healthcare law? Well, you don't go to the doctor for free. You don't buy prescriptions for free. That's all commerce. It's all buying and selling. So could they make laws on healthcare? Yeah, because they can link it to the Commerce Clause. That's important to know. How else can the federal government exert power? Well, grants and aids is another example. Grants and aids are something that is when the federal government gives the states money. The federal government does not have to give the states any money, but they do. And highway funding is a good example. They give each state a lot of money for repairing our roads. Money that if the federal government didn't give us, we would have to get that from our own citizens. We would have to tax our own citizens more with state taxes. Now, the federal government is not required to give states money for highways or any other grants and aids, but they've been doing it for a lot of years. Sometimes the federal government can get the states what they want the states to do by kind of putting a condition, known as a condition of aid. Think of, let's say that you are an adult. You're a 20-year-old that decides that you want to live at home with your parents for, 6 months. And your parents say, yes, you can live with us, and we'll pay for, the electricity and the Wi-Fi. We'll pay for all the food. You don't have to pay for any of that stuff, but you have to follow some rules. We have a 11 o'clock curfew, and you have to wash the dishes every night, and so on. Well, you're an adult. You're 20 years old. You could say, no, I don't want to do this. That's your choice. But if you decide that you want to take their aid, live in the house, and they'll pay all the bills or whatever, but with those conditions, then you can make that decision. Those are known as condition of aid. Well, the federal government does that too. They may say, all right, it's your states, it's your power to do what you want. However, if you want to keep getting this money, here's what we want you to do. And let's use an example. And probably the best example I can give you is the drinking age. The drinking age is a state law. Each state can set the drinking age at whatever they want it. And back in the 80s and previously, the drinking age was, in South Dakota, was 18. Well, the federal government wanted the drinking age to be uniform across the United States, and they wanted it to be 21. But they didn't have the power to do this. They didn't feel like they could. So what they said was, states, you know all that federal highway funding money that we give you? If you want to continue getting that money, change your drinking age to 21. Now, South Dakota could have said, no, we're going to leave it at age 18 or whatever. But if we would have done that, we would have forfeited all that federal money, which we really, really like. So the states, South Dakota and all the other states, changed their drinking age to 21 to continue to get that money. We didn't have to. But if we wanted to take that money, that was a condition for it. And sometimes the federal government will use conditions of age to get states to do some things. Okay, that is the basics of the powers: enumerated powers, implied powers, reserve powers, and other ways the federal government can get the states to pass laws within this whole concept of federalism.